On May 31st, 1913, Secretary of State William Jennings Bryan certified the state of Connecticut's ratification of the 17th Amendment to the Constitution, which mandated direct election of U.S. senators. The founders designed the Senate to represent the state governments in our national union, and, up until then, most senators were appointed by their state legislatures. However, many progressives decried the bribes and corruption that sometimes accompanied state legislatures appointing two lucky cronies to a plum political position like the Senate. Direct election by the people would surely fix all that. Now that the Senate is directly elected and therefore fully corruption-free, its purpose has morphed from the voice of the states into a glorified employment agency, conducting job interviews for judicial candidates in globally broadcast hearings that ought to take place under a big top tent. We're not here to talk about the Supreme Court. We're here to talk about the Senate. And if you were with us last week, you remember control of the Senate is up for grabs in this election. Right now, it's looking like a couple of seats may switch hands, but we could very likely end up exactly where we are now, 51-49 Republicans. This week, we want to get into a little more detail on the competitive races. Now, you recall last week that there are a couple of surprise close races in the Senate. First is the Texas Senate race between Congressman Beto O'Rourke and incumbent Ted Cruz. A month ago, the polling average had this race as close as 3 points. Since then, the average has grown to a 6-point Cruz lead. O'Rourke's never led in any poll. The closest he got was back in August, the poll of registered voters, where Cruz only led by 1 point. This one is still too close for Republicans' comfort, but it looks to be Cruz's race to lose. Same story in the other surprise close race, New Jersey. Incumbent Bob Menendez is getting a scare from another Bob, businessman Bob Hugin. The polling average here is still 7.7% in Menendez's favor. As in Texas, there has not been a poll where Hugin's led, and this one looks okay for Democrats, but again, too close for comfort. Let's look at Arizona, where it's a battle of congresswomen. Kyrsten Sinema on the Democrat side, Martha McSally on the Republican side to replace retiring Jeff Flake. After the month he's had, retirement can't come too soon. Martha McSally flew A-10s in combat, and if you know anything about A-10s, you know about its 620-pound cannon that fires 4,000 30-millimeter armor-piercing incendiary rounds per minute. If you don't know, Google it. McSally launched an ad that hits Sinema like 4,000 30-millimeter rounds. It juxtaposes Sinema speaking at an anti-war protest in a pink tutu with McSally standing proudly by her warthog. It's a great ad. We'll see if it helps her close the gap because Sinema continues to pull around 3.5% ahead of McSally. This one's always been close, so we'll keep an eye on it. In Florida, we see another very tight race between incumbent Senator Bill Nelson and sitting Republican Governor Rick Scott. Nelson has a 2.5-point lead in the polling average right now. As little as a month ago, Scott had a 2-point lead, so this one continues to go back and forth. Michael, the most ignored hurricane I can remember, is bearing down on the Panhandle as we speak. It's a Category 4 monster. Without sounding too cynical, and these days can you really be too cynical, how will the storm impact this race? In Indiana, businessman Mike Braun continues to give incumbent Joe Donnelly all he can handle, but Donnelly maintains his 2.5-point lead. As with so many of these races, it's important to reiterate that we haven't seen any polling that was in the field during the Kavanaugh three-ring circus. So how that impacts these races is still to be determined. Trump is popular in Indiana, and Donnelly's vote against Kavanaugh could move this race. Let's look at Missouri, where incumbent Claire McCaskill is fighting off a challenge from State Attorney General Josh Hawley, whose commitment in the race had been in question earlier in the campaign, but he seems to have addressed many of those concerns. Now he finds himself ever so slightly ahead in the polling average against Claire. The race has changed leads, but it's never been more than a 2-point race either way, so it's so up for grabs. In Montana, a state where Donald Trump won by 20 points, Democrat incumbent Jon Tester maintains the slimmest lead over challenger Matt Rosendale. Tester's maintained a 2 to 4 point advantage in the most recent polls. It just doesn't seem to be moving very much. But again, it will be interesting to see if there's any sort of impact from the Kavanaugh hearings. Nevada incumbent Republican Dean Heller is doing his best to hold off challenger Jacky Rosen. Rosen has a slight lead in the polling average, about 1%, so this one's a total toss-up. But in a state where the casinos and hotels are full of organized labor ready to get out the vote for Rosen, well, let's just say I wouldn't bet the house on Heller pulling off the inside straight. North Dakota seems to be a bright spot for Republicans. Incumbent Heidi Heitkamp has trailed challenger Kevin Cramer pretty much the entire race. The most recent polling has him up double digits, so the race is certainly one the Republicans are looking likely to pick off, offsetting the potential Democrat pickups in Arizona or Nevada. And despite Taylor Swift's last-minute pitch to her fans in Tennessee, are her fans old enough to vote? Yeah. We'll see. Congressman Marsha Blackburn, one of the 2 congresswomen who insist on being called congressman, has finally overtaken former Governor Phil Bredesen, has a 3-point lead in the polling average after trailing by as many as 7 points over the summer. Republicans hope to flip West Virginia by unseating Joe Manchin, but challenger Patrick Morrisey hasn't laid a glove on him. Maybe Republicans should have run the Cocaine Mitch guy. Maybe not. The stout soprano isn't singing here, but she's definitely warming up the pipes backstage. So again, too soon to tell. But so far, my money is on the Senate ending up where it is now, 51-49 in favor of Republicans, with just some seats changing hands. Voter registration deadlines are coming in many states. So when it comes to your duty to vote, listen to Taylor and don't shake it off. And make sure your employees know how to register and where to vote. Let them know it's important to your business. You can't tell them who to vote for, but let them know they can have time off work to vote. We can help you with messaging for your people. Give me a call, send me an email, carrier pigeon, smoke signal, whatever, if you want to talk about it. Next week, we'll start looking at the numbers in the House. That's it for this week. Thanks for watching, and thanks for supporting NAED.